Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast, where we answer key questions in dating, relationships, success, and fulfillment, and explore the psychology of masculinity. Now, here's your host, world-renowned therapist and life coach, David Tian.
Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast. I'm David Tian, your host. In the previous episode, we explored repression, emotional suppression, and how so much of the old-fashioned masculinity, or some versions of toxic masculinity, which is a kind of macho masculinity that sees emotions other than anger, as a kind of weakness or vulnerability, as emotional vulnerability as weakness, are preventing men from experiencing the fullness and the richness of life. And a life lived under emotional repression ends up, over the long term, becoming one that is robbed of its color, of its variety, of the great range that is already there in human experience, but that because of repression and suppression is unavailable to the person suffering from toxic repression. And instead, he lives a gray life, a black and white life, a life that's robbed of color. As well, on the other end of the spectrum, on the other extreme from repression is overwhelm, emotional overwhelm. And I touched on that only briefly, but I just want to mention that here again, emotional overwhelm as the other side of the spectrum, where instead of suppression, you have the opposite of anything goes and there's no control whatsoever. And it just feels like it's controlling you. The emotions control you. And then you end up trying to control the sources or the triggers, which often is other people, but it also might be the environment around you, or a combination of them, because other people is part of the environment around you. And you blame them for how you feel. And this is like the common way that college students nowadays are taught or indoctrinated in this kind of brainwashing of, I'm helpless in the face of emotional overwhelm and I must blame it on others. Either way, there's no control over emotion. One is a kind of just shutting everything down, and the other is being flooded, emotionally overwhelmed. In either way, there's very little skill or facility with emotions. There's actually very little control or management or regulation of one's own emotions. So we covered that and the reasons for that in the last episode. And I ended with the sort of hope that there is a way. There's an empirically verified way, and actually multiple ways, multiple approaches that have been proven to give you the skills with your emotions so that you can have it relatively within your control for you to increase the intensity and frequency of the emotions you'd like to experience and decrease the intensity and frequency of the emotions you'd rather not experience. And these include, if you want to experience more joy, happiness, love, fulfillment on a consistent basis, if you have the skills to do that, this is available to you. There's actually a way to learn it. And because these are skills, these are emotional skills, and being skills, you can train them, you can improve in them, and therefore you can master them. Right? You can learn them, you can improve in them, you can master them. And that's what we're going to be diving deeper into in this episode. And I covered this in the last episode, but just by way of review, remember, emotions are everything. The beginning and ends of all of our goals and aims, especially because I know I have many achievers who are listening, and I resonate with them because I have many achiever parts. And we achievers hyper-focus on these goals and we forget that there's a reason why we pick these goals in the first place. But because we forget that, the reasons why, we just get stuck on these goals and think that the goals are valuable in and of themselves. And typical achiever goals are money, making more money, making a certain amount of money. And then as you get closer to that, you have to keep raising that amount that you'd be satisfied with. And you may not believe that because maybe the goal that you've set for yourself is so far off and so out of your league that you don't realize that. But if you are a true achiever, as you get closer to that monetary goal, you'll necessarily have to raise it in order for you to continue being an achiever. It might be a fitness goal. And in order to sustain the fitness goal, you have to keep ratcheting up the stakes. You got to keep raising the standard there. And maybe for some of you, the goal has to do with women and success with women, or your social life, or whatever it is. You have these goals and you think it's just no duh obvious why you would have those goals. But it's hopefully you can understand that those goals are not in and of themselves good. It's the reasons why you're pursuing them that make it good or bad for you. And the whole reason why you're pursuing the goals in the first place is to skip to the end of the argument. And so if you want to get into this a bit more deeply, I covered it in the last episode. But to skip to the end, the reason you are aiming for these goals is because you're hoping that if you achieve these goals, it will make you feel a different way. You're hoping at the end of it that if you can accomplish these goals, whether it might even just be something as simple as a sense of accomplishment, but very often, I mean, if it's a big ass goal, it's probably not just the sense of accomplishment because you could have chosen something else. But it will also generally be, if it's you're early in the achiever journey, it might just be security. It might just be a sense of certainty that you will have enough money to put food on the table or to pay your rent. And as you get better at being an achiever, that will go up and up. And so you might be aiming for a sense of significance or a sense that you are enough or that you've accomplished enough, that you're worthy, that you're good enough now, and that you can finally rest. And whatever it is that you're hoping to feel as a result of getting those goals, notice those are feelings, those are emotions. The whole project of pursuing this goal gets off the ground because of emotion. And then what you're hoping to get at the end is what? Emotion. So the beginning and the end of this journey that you're working so hard for, and for achievers, this might be a multi-year, multi-decade journey to finally feel like you're enough, right? That starts and ends with emotion. And then in the middle, for you to actually experience the richness of life, it's also emotion, right? What you're hoping to experience in flow or on a day-to-day basis. So up and down the whole spectrum of human experience from the beginning to the end, especially as an achiever. I'm just taking achievers as an easy example because I know many of you are achievers. That, especially for achievers, and this might be shocking to achievers, it's up and down the whole spectrum. It is emotion. To get off the ground at all, it's emotion. And I gave the example of Buridan's ass. And if you don't know what that is about, I explained that in the last episode, but it's a great way to remember this point. And Buridan is a 14th century philosopher, and he came up with this example, and the ass is a donkey. It's not actually his ass. So the ass is a donkey. So Buridan's donkey is at a crossroads, and he's equally thirsty and hungry, and down one road is food, and down the other road is water. He's equally distant. The donkey's equally distant from the water and the food, and he's equally thirsty and hungry. Doesn't know what to do. Stands there in indecision because he's got equally weighted desires, and dies. And this is a great way to understand how emotions work in decision-making, that it all starts with emotion. To get going and choose a goal or aim, it's got to be a preference. It's got to be a desire, a want that overpowers the other options. And so you move forward with that one. And without that desire or preference or want, you won't be able to move forward. And this is Buridan's ass. From the beginning to the end, it's all about human emotion in terms of your behavior and your decision-making. Emotions not just guide it, but it sets the agenda. And then it guides it along the way. And it selects what you will actually be aiming for. So if you have no control or little control over your emotions, then you're kind of going around like a chicken with its head cut off, just mindlessly carrying out some tasks without reflecting on why you're doing it in the first place. In the last episode, I also busted a myth that I've called the Cartesian error. And I borrow this from the book Descartes' Error by Antonio Damasio. But it encapsulates a huge amount of research literature that spans many decades. It includes work by Jonathan Haidt that some of you might have heard of. I've mentioned him in his work before, but many, many others in top research institutes around the world on understanding the intimate and inextricable, the essential connection between what we artificially consider to be thinking and emotion. The Cartesian error is traced back to in a kind of caricature of Descartes of, I think, therefore I am, who overemphasized, overprioritized the thinking over feeling. And it would be actually more accurate to make it I feel, therefore I am. So in this episode, I want to draw your attention to some emotional skills that you can learn, improve in, and train in, and master. And these are all skills that have a lot of empirical backing to them. They've been verified through scores and scores of scientific evidence and research papers published over many decades. Okay, so I've got three broad categories of emotional skills. And the first category is more purely focused on the emotions themselves. So I'll just give you an example of a few here, and just a few to get you started. And these are a few that I've done quite a lot of research around and development on in partnership with a team that's developing technological innovation to help mental health. And part of this is a project called Emotional Mastery. And you can find the link from my website under online courses, and then scroll to the bottom and you'll see the affiliated programs. That's as of the recording of this. That might change later, but that's where you can find the link. And I'll just tell you a few of these emotional skills that you can work on, that you can learn, work on, train, get better at, practice, and so forth. And the first skill is present awareness. This incorporates a lot of mindfulness training. And with this kind of type of presence, by the way, is sort of the gateway to, and is one of the essential foundational skills that are required, especially for a man, to succeed in a relationship, in an intimate relationship. A lot of men, because of their decades of repression and suppression, have a lot of trouble actually being present. In fact, I had many decades of practice suppressing and repressing my own emotions and seeing myself as ultra rational and intellectual. And this meant that I didn't actually understand what presence meant. I thought when I heard the word presence, I thought it meant like it could mean being present, or I thought it was more like charisma, like your presence in the room kind of thing. Like, do you take up a lot of space? Do you draw attention to yourself? That kind of thing. That's not what I mean by presence in the therapeutic context. It's a lot more like mindfulness and being present with your woman in an intimate relationship. And the same with women. I'm just kind of speaking more to men. I mean, this is called masculine psychology for a reason. As women generally are better at being present, because what being present means is you're fully emotionally, intellectually, physically there, focused and immersed in flow with the other person in that interaction, whether it's a conversation. It doesn't even need to be through talking with words. It can just be making eye contact and feeling whatever they're feeling, and fully immersed there in that interaction, that space with the other person. This is really difficult for a lot of men who are really good at suppressing and repressing their emotions, because presence requires vulnerability. It requires that you're fully there and open and aren't guarded and don't have any barriers up or any shields up and aren't talking as a way of, or intellectualizing as a way of protecting yourself, which is a common use of the intellect. This is why most professors don't understand emotions, or that even if they're researchers, they understand it at arm's length like an object of study in a laboratory, but they are not practitioners themselves. And presence is one of the first ways that you can tell they're not really emotionally and intellectually present. They might be there physically, but they're thinking about some problem they're working on their research, or with business people, they're already thinking about the next meeting, or they're thinking about how they look there, and they're not really there with you. I mean, that's an interpersonal application of the skill of presence. But the skill of presence in and of itself needs to be worked on its own. And mindfulness is a great way of doing that. And at the most basic level, presence means being present with yourself, with what thoughts and feelings are happening for you. And they might be in your unconscious, because repression and suppression means that you've shoved them into your unconscious, so you're not even consciously aware of what you're feeling. And there are a lot of men who've been laboring under toxic repression of their emotions for so long that they don't actually know why they think what they think or feel what they feel. And even more alarming, they don't know what they're even feeling. And they might not even know what they're thinking in terms of if they're asked, what do you want? Or what is your preference here? Or what do you really want? They're waiting instead to be told what to do so that they can carry out the orders, because that's their MO and has been that way. It might be MO like orders from society, from teachers, from parents. It might even be a kind of implicit kind of communication of, Obviously, you should do well in school. That's what we want from you. And so they get set on that as a goal. Or obviously, we want you to make money. And so they unthinkingly, unreflectively, mindlessly go about attacking these goals. And that's what I was referring to earlier, the Cartesian error. And one way to overturn that is practicing presence. And that's one of the most basic skills, because if you can't be with your emotions, if you can't even sense what emotions you're feeling, then obviously you can't work with them. So the first step is to actually get comfortable and get skill and practice being fully aware in the present moment with what you're thinking and feeling and what you're doing physically. So you can mindfully, for instance, drink a cup of tea. This is a common practice in Zen monasteries or meditation or mindfulness retreats and things like this. You can mindfully sweep the temple grounds. And this is a real practice that's gone on for hundreds of years, actually thousands of years, mindfully walking. And this is just being the skill of being fully aware in the present moment. Now, I've done a dozen or so podcasts on mindfulness, on meditation. So if you want to get more into that, I've got a lot of content. Just look through my channels, not just in this podcast series, but my earlier podcasts, as well as on my YouTube content. And you can just go to my site to find these. And when you're good at being present, when you're good at presence, you can be with your thoughts, feelings, and fully immersed in your behaviors or actions without blanking, without numbing, without denying, without distracting, without fleeing from them. And this is a tremendous power that comes from growing this level of self-awareness and maintaining presence with whatever's going on for you, even in the most challenging circumstances. And there are levels to this, but you need that most basic level to get started on these other emotional skills. Just being fully aware and being able to be with whatever's coming up for you in the present moment. Okay, here's another skill. Endurance, to be able to endure whatever emotions are coming up. And this is something I raised in the last episode, endurance. And if you see it as endurance, that's a kind of a challenge to all of us achievers, because we think it's some kind of weakness. But if you're afraid that emotions and vulnerability is weakness, you're a scaredy cat. You're a coward. Right? You're already afraid. You're not such a tough guy, right? Toxic masculinity that sees sadness or feelings as a weakness. No, it's the opposite. You're the weak one because you're too scared to be sad. That's sad, right? So if you put it that way, it's as a challenge of developing your resilience because you're too weak to endure the emotions that come up, then hopefully it's like a challenge to the masculine energy to step up, to be able to endure whatever emotions come up. Now, I know a lot of guys say, there's too much pain. No, I don't want to feel it. And I'd rather be like numbingly, mindlessly, unfeelingly going about achieving or being productive. But they think that they're tougher that way, but they're not. They're actually weaker that way because they're too scared and they don't have the endurance to last with whatever pain comes up. And if you just repress the pain, if you just ignore it, that doesn't actually solve the problem. You're not actually dealing with it. And I think if you're intellectual, you know this, but maybe you've spent too long and around too many people who have the toxic view that emotions are better swept under the rug than to be pulled out so that you can endure them and get through them onto the other side. Because you will get to the other side. Emotions, because they are felt physically, cannot stay in your system forever, even though it may feel that way. And if you can endure it long enough, it will pass, and then another wave will come, but there will be a space between these waves when you can catch your breath. And you've got to endure these waves in order to process them. If you lock them up, sweep them under the rug, you suppress them or repress them, you'll never be able to work on them. And therefore, it's sort of like, the analogy I like to use is like you have a wound. And instead of attending to the wound and cleaning it out and actually healing it, you instead just put all of these bandages over it. And you just continue to walk on as if it weren't there. And you might be very successful in just putting lots of Band-Aids on it. But eventually, what will happen is the wound will not heal properly and it will just fester and then it will rot. Right? And then it'll start to get all yellow and pussy. But instead of actually cleaning it out, you just keep covering it up with some bandages and you just keep swapping bandages every day. And then you'll notice that now the wound is starting to spread. The rot isn't just confined to that small wound when it started. Now it's spread. Maybe you had a wound on your knee, and now it's spread up to your thighs or down to your ankles. And now you can't even, eventually you won't be able to use your leg because it's all rotting all the way up and down. Now you got to lose your leg to save the rest of your body. And that's what happens actually with emotions that you repress that are too painful to endure. But because you've never brought them to the light of day, you've never gotten to clean them out. And the longer you wait, the more painful it is. Right? That's actually a really good analogy. I messed up a few years ago, and I injured my knee, scraped it real bad. And I was traveling between America to Singapore and then back to Taiwan in the span of a week. And I thought, I'll wait till I get back to my home out in Taiwan to deal with it. And in the meantime, I just covered it up because I had events to do. I was very busy, lots of meetings and lots of flights. And by the time I got back to Taiwan a week later, it started off as just a scrape that if I had tended to it on that day, it would have been all right, obviously. But then it turned into all this yellow pussy, it was festering, and it was nasty, and it was painful, very, very sensitive. And that meant that I had to go every day to the clinic, and they cleaned it out and redressed the bandages every day. And it was very painful. What do they call it? Scaling? Debriding. It was called debriding. And that was painful. And I had to endure that, I think, for almost 2 months, or maybe over 2 months, every day cleaning that thing out. And the first 6 weeks was incredibly painful. Do you struggle in your interactions with women or in your intimate relationship? Are fear, shame, or neediness sabotaging your relationships or attractiveness? In my Platinum Partnership Program, you'll discover how to transform your psychological issues, improve your success with women, and uncover your true self. Get access to all my current and future online courses by applying for the Platinum Partnership today at davidtianphd.com/platinum. Anyway, that was just 6 weeks. I've dealt with people, and I'm working with people who have been repressing emotions for 3 decades or 4 decades. And it's one thing to repress emotions. You can also repress memories that are attached to these emotions. And when you finally bring them to light because they've been basically numbing and you've been losing an entire part of, your emotional body, so to speak, and finally bringing them up, you're going to have to endure that pain of the debriding of these repressed emotions and dealing with them. And it's never too late, right? So you can either live with a life that is 1/10 of what it could be, just to avoid bringing up the pain that you've been shoving under the rug. But it would be better for you to have the strength and the courage to face it. And that's a clarion call to the masculine parts of you that will step up to this challenge, that it's the opposite. I'm changing up the paradigm here. I'm reframing the whole thing for you, right? So it's not weak to feel sadness or vulnerability. It's the opposite. It's strength, because it would be weak for the macho masculine who's scared of weakness, who thinks it's beneath him, but it's actually, he's scared of it. He's scared of the pain of facing these emotions. You can actually train your resilience to endure whatever emotions come up, no matter how painful they feel in the present. You're going to need to do that to persevere long enough to break through to healing and growth in your life. And there are ways to do this, to increase your threshold of tolerance for any emotions, no matter how painful or uncomfortable. And there are ways of coping during any crisis, even when it feels impossible to endure it. And you can actually tap in to this healing power of radical acceptance instead of being forced to be shackled by the weight of your toxic shame, for instance. So there's a whole set of endurance skills, and I've got a section, I think it's about 15 modules in emotional mastery that run you through basic emotion endurance skills and techniques. And these are things that you can get better at, you can do each day and get stronger at, and you can actually build up your tolerance, just like you would in a workout. For what was previously was painful to you can actually now be something that is cathartic, that feels incredibly fulfilling when you come out the other end of it. And being with the parts of you that are holding this pain is essential for your healing and growth. And one other skill is what I call titration. You might also see it as a kind of regulation. And this is the ability to increase or decrease at will the intensity of your emotions so that you can control your emotions so that they don't control you. Along the way, you'll also learn how to control your own thoughts and your behaviors because it's all connected. And there are actual skills here. There's techniques that you can practice and get better at and make second nature. You can actually train your ability to reduce the intensity of any overwhelming emotions or to steer your emotions in one direction or another, all at will. So for those younger guys listening to this or younger people listening to this who have been coddled by their society, by your teachers, by your education systems, you really need to develop the skill of emotion titration. Titration is, I'm using that term like a tap, right? Like a tap, like it's on a sink. You can turn it on and you can turn it off, right? So you can turn on hot and cold, right? So you can increase the intensity or decrease the intensity. And there are actual ways of doing that. And you can get better at that. Now, this is a slightly more advanced skill than presence or even endurance. And we build up to that. And I do that in my program, Emotional Mastery. But whether you do it with me or with your therapist or with a therapy group, these are well-documented skills that you'll find in DBT groups, especially dialectical behavior therapy, but also in mindfulness-based CBT, in MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction practices, ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. My emotional mastery program draws on all of these modalities, as well as NVC, nonviolent communication, when we get to the interpersonal aspect of it. And it's all informed by IFS therapy, internal family systems therapy. I've talked about especially a lot IFS therapy in this podcast series. But those are three examples of emotional mastery, emotional skills that you can learn, train, practice, and master. Presence, endurance, titration or regulation, right? And so that's the first category. And there's another skill of a whole set of skills around IFS therapy of being with your parts as they're feeling uncomfortable or emotions that they don't like, and being able to be with them and help them and eventually help them let go of their burdens and to help them integrate more in a more healthy way into your system overall. And so that's a whole other set of skills. There's another category, the second category I wanted to bring up, which is a cognitive category. And this is probably the oldest, most ancient type of therapy, which is philosophy. Philosophy as therapy. And believe it or not, before the analytic turn in philosophy, before the Enlightenment ruined philosophy in many ways, or started the ruining of it, philosophy was primarily therapeutic in East and West, all around the world. And it still is a major part of therapy, getting clarity around your thoughts. And so there's a whole, probably the most empirically validated type of therapy, a whole type of therapy called cognitive therapy. And cognitive therapy is about catching distorted thinking. And this is really just logic and clear thinking. So if you have training in philosophy, you can already you'd be a pro at cognitive therapy. You don't actually need to do cognitive therapy on its own if you're already a good philosopher or logician with informal logic. And you just apply the tools of informal logic to what you're thinking and what thoughts are leading to the emotions that you're feeling. And that includes, that'll require an emotion skill called presence. Because if you're not aware of what you're thinking and feeling, you're not going to be able to work on them through cognitive therapy. So that's often where professional philosophers fall flat in their faces because they've repressed their emotions so much and that they've severed the tie, or so they think, between their thoughts and their feelings, that they often are emotionally stunted, even though they're quite intellectually advanced. So cognitive therapy definitely has its limits, but it's also, along with all of the emotional skills I've mentioned, plus the other emotional skills, the cognitive category of skills is really, really powerful and helpful because we don't want to just go in with our eyes closed, our brains shut off. You want to think about what thoughts are leading to these feelings. Because make no mistake, thoughts are leading to feelings. So the standard theory of emotions is cognitive. It's that emotions consist of two components. And the first is the phenomenology of it, the felt sense of it, the physical feelings like the actual nerve endings and so forth, the heart beating a certain way. your breathing being a certain way. And that's the physicality of it, the physiology of it, the phenomenology of it. And then the other part of it is phenomenology plus the interpretation of it. The interpretation is the cognitive part. The example I like to give is snake slithering towards you. Most of us would start to panic or feel scared because our interpretation is snake equals danger or disgust or something like that. Yuck, fear, right? That's our interpretation of the snake slithering towards us. And there's another guy who's like, oh, there you are. It's my pet snake Todd. And he holds out his arm and the snake curls around his arm and he pets the snake. And he's really happy because his interpretation, his cognitive interpretation of the same phenomenology is it's his pet snake. And so he's really happy. So just notice the interpretation of it leads to an emotion. And if you can control the interpretation of it through philosophy, then you're able to control how you feel just through thinking. And that's not all of it. There's a lot of limitations to it, especially if you're not able to be present or endure the emotions that come up or that you're feeling, to trace them far back enough so you can find what the thoughts are, the interpretations themselves are that are creating this emotion. So that's basic. But once you do, it's a very useful skill to be able to call on for that cognitive set of skills to influence or transform your emotions. So that's the second category, cognitive. And you can do that through cognitive therapy or through training in philosophy, along with the first set of skills, the first category, which is more purely emotion skills. And then the third category is behavioral. So you notice that the famous type of therapy, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the combination of the second and third category, cognitive and behavioral. Behavioral is, as it sounds, it's about your behavior. And the more that you do something, the more it influences your thoughts and your feelings. And that's just a really important thing to pay attention to. And of course, your physiology influences how you feel. And that's been one of the most basic things that have been proven out over the past few decades. So it's really important to be able to control your physiology. Your physical body influences to a great degree what emotions you're actually feeling. And those who bought into, so like old folks like myself, Gen X's and older, and even some older millennials, have bought into the Cartesian myth so deeply that they're not aware of how their physical body influences their mind, let alone their mind influencing their body or how they're feeling, right? So they're cut off already from their feelings, and the neck up is all they live in. But even more, they're not able to take advantage of the incredibly powerful effects that downstream and upstream of the body on your emotions. Your emotions are actually happening in your brain. It's not some kind of ethereal mind, at least from a scientific perspective, right? So you can actually track, if you were able to look into the brain. The emotions you're feeling are happening somewhere in your brain. And of course, your brain is connected through your spine, right down into the rest of your body through the autonomic nervous system. And there are real downstream effects of the emotions in your body. And they're upstream as well. So if you eat a rotten food, it's going to make you feel rotten. Not just because it's going to screw up your stomach and you're going to be in the toilet, but also it's going to influence how you feel. So you're not going to be in a good mood, right? And that's an easy example, a more extreme one, I guess, of something happening in the body that affects your mood, your emotions. But also it happens in a positive way. And so the easy example is the smile, signaling to the brain that there's something to be happy about. And so you get a little hit of happiness there just briefly. But all of that physiology, if you're not in tune with what your body is doing to your mind. So a lot of people who are emotionally repressed are also not actually present with their bodies. They might be working out and actually numbing their bodies. So a lot of guys who spend a lot of time working out in these kind of stiff standard bodybuilding movements are very strong. They built up a lot of muscle. But many of them are unaware of their own bodies. So if you ask them to isolate part of their bodies in a kind of like dancing movement, unless they're looking into a mirror, they're not going to be able to do it very well. And even if they are looking in the mirror, they'll probably still not be able to do it very well because they're not very well attuned to their bodies. And this is something I learned the hard way too, over many years of trying to get better at dancing for the purposes of attraction, and going through so many different types of dancing classes and one-on-one training. And it was really only when I paired pure movement training with what I was doing in therapy and acting and method acting, that I was finally able to unlock the fact that the reason why it was so hard for me to isolate various body parts and move them in dance without looking in the mirror, or even when I am looking in the mirror, and that stiffness that's there, is because of the repression. And that is, you can tell as you get better at the movement that You can tell somebody who's emotionally repressed by how they hold their bodies. So that's the third category, behavioral. And I'm just like a pure behavior, as in just pure movement. But also, of course, the things that you're doing, the activities that you're doing throughout the day and throughout your life are actually programming you into certain habits of thought and feeling. And it's a huge category. And that would include in this category interpersonal skills. So a big part of being good with women, I know some of you who follow me because of you were looking for becoming better with women. So a big part of being better with women is developing interpersonal skills that will, of course, cover not just being better with women, but people in general. A huge part of that is being in control of your own emotions. And step one is just being aware of your own emotions, let alone being able to control them. But being able to control your own emotions is a prerequisite for influencing the emotions of others. The most direct pathway for influencing other people's emotions is your own. And this has been proven out. I mean, one of the easiest scientific concepts to just illustrate this is mirror neurons, but that's just one of many. And we know that we start to pick up the moods of those around us, and they affect us greatly. I mean, all of us men who are afraid of these emotions, you probably had a parent who was either very volatile, so they were very unpredictable. Maybe they came home from work and came home and just started shouting at the kids erratically, So it's unpredictable in the sense of, I don't know if I'm going to get the calm dad or mom or the crazy or the angry one or the impatient one. Or you had a parent who was shut down and repressed him or herself. And so you've learned this from them and you picked it up from them. This is interpersonal, right? So interpersonal skills, being able to master them, being able to control your own emotions as a pathway as a quick and natural and automatic and almost effortless way of influencing others' emotions. Okay, so just to recap, the three broad categories of emotional skills I've covered here, or just mentioned so that you're aware of them, is more purely emotional skills such as presence, emotion endurance, emotion regulation or titration, and the whole other subcategory of IFS emotion skills like unburdening. And then the second category were cognitive ones. The third category were the behavioral ones. And just as we're ending here, I wanted to tell you the story of a client, and his name is Andrew. And Andrew is from a conservative but technologically advanced, very modern Asian country. And Andrew grew up in a home that was incredibly repressed, with parents that were very enmeshed with him, as is common in many Asian societies. And as he learned about toxic parenting, about assertiveness, about toxic shame, about boundaries, about mental health, about emotions, about repression, about healing and unburdening, as he learned about these on a cognitive theoretical level through my recorded courses, he was able to spot more and more what was happening first in himself, the emotions that he was feeling that he wasn't even aware of before, and that he was repressing and suppressing, but that were under the surface. He was able to spot them now because he was able to sense under the surface of what was going on and stay with them. And it's great to see that I have a lot of intellectual type of clients, or clients with strongly intellectual parts, especially in Asia. And they can leverage this to allow their intellectual parts to lead them through this process of healing, because they can really capitalize on that second category of emotion skills coming from the cognitive set. Just understanding the theory of it and intellectually can help them to stay long enough and to really commit to feeling through and enduring the painful emotions and being present with them as they come up. And as a result, Andrew was able to see how in his day-to-day life there were all of these different boundary violations that were going on, and that he had been living under the weight of a lot of toxic shame, and was able to get in touch with me to do some one-on-one work. And it's been a joy and privilege to guide him through that. And more just finding that he's, even though still living in a kind of toxic situation with his family, and even really with his society and his peer group, as he's improving that situation, this practical situation, he's increasing his skills and his strength emotionally to be able to endure whatever comes up, to stay present with what comes up, to notice more and more in himself and in others as these emotions are coming up in himself and in others. And it's been a real joy and privilege to see that. This incredible freedom that's happening relatively quickly as a result of him doing this cognitive work on his own of just, through my courses, leading to the research literature that he was digging into on his own, and then doing the emotional work together of developing that presence and that endurance and so on, these emotion skills. So I know that for some of you, this might be airy-fairy. I don't know, any talk of emotions might be. Those who live under the weight of toxic repression, especially this kind of repressive masculinity, the old-fashioned masculinity, might think that this is too nebulous, this is too abstract, and they want some practical how-tos. Well, guess what? There are a lot of practical how-tos. There are a lot of techniques when it comes to emotional mastery. And there is a lot of empirical evidence for these. And I walk guys through them. I walk people through them in my program, this project that I'm on a team that, I'm a minority owner in this team currently. And we've developed emotional mastery. We're developing that as part of one of the many projects that are underway. And that one is called Emotional Mastery. And you can find that in my site under online courses and affiliated programs. And check it out, Emotional Mastery. In the next episode, I'm going to try to make this even more concrete for you so you have a better idea, so it's not so abstract, an even better idea of what it might look like to master your emotions and to develop facility with these skills, to develop mastery with these skills. Thank you so much for listening. And if you like this podcast at all, please share it with anyone else that you think would benefit from it. Let me know what you thought in the comments. And I look forward to hearing from you. And I look forward to welcoming you in the next episode. For now, David Tian, signing out.